Yes, indeed. It is absolutely the Hype UK right here on Westside 89.6 FM. I am Sherryl Blu, and guess who I've got in the seat in front of me? I have Henry Fisher, Policy Director and Editor of Volteface. A good evening.
Good evening, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. Oh, you look different now with the headphones. It's like your head's just suddenly grown, like...
Yeah, I know. It feels like I'm wearing a massive hat now. Yeah.
It does. It looks like it as well. It's really fair. But okay, so Henry, thank you. Thank you for your time this evening. So just before we tuck into things, just give us a little bit of background about what you do and who you are, basically.
So I work for Volteface, which is so we're a think tank that work on drug policy. So we try and work on any kind of public policies that have any kind of relation to drugs, and that covers quite a broad range. A lot of people, because people don't talk about drugs really well. People don't talk about drugs enough, I think. But they actually impact on a lot of things, whether it happens to do with like criminal justice and prisons, or whether it's the nightlife and nighttime economy and clubs getting closed down, or whether it's public health or just the police generally. There's loads of things that drugs have an impact in. So we try and cover all sorts of different policy areas, and of course drugs themselves, whether they should be regulated or not, and things like that. So that they're all the things that we try and cover. Okay,
so it's really wide. There's a lot that you guys do.
Yeah, exactly.
So Volteface, how old is Volteface?
So we've been going for just over a year, actually.
Wow, so it's over a year.
Yeah, and we started off really just as a magazine, just to try and generate more debate about drugs, really, just to kind of get some new ideas and fresh voices in. Because often, there's a lot of echo chambers and people just tend to talk to themselves. So we tried to bring in other voices that perhaps haven't thought about drugs before.
Yeah.
And then we got to a point where we thought, well, actually, we've got enough expertise that we can lean on now, that we can actually start making maybe sort of policy recommendations and things like that. So we started doing a bit of work last year, and we've just this week published our third policy report out of 4 that's coming out in a series. Sheet? Yes, that was Black Sheep. Which covered. So that was looking at cannabis use and treatment and kind of problematic cannabis use, and the fact that maybe the treatment maybe isn't sufficient for a lot of people that might run into trouble with their cannabis use. And we've published 2 other reports so far. So one was about prisons, and then the one before that was looking at how drugs are being dealt with elsewhere in the world, and in particular kind of North America, where there's already a wave of legalization and regulation sweeping across there. So we looked at what was happening there and how that might impact on the UK, and how we should probably start thinking about that already.
Yeah, but I mean, there's so much. I think when you consider the decriminalisation of drugs, I think so many people kind of don't really know what to think, because it's very, I think the water's quite muddy. A lot of people don't really know what it involves when you talk about decriminalisation. And I think, well, for most people, the average Joe would probably think, oh, that just means drugs are legal. We're going to have people running around taking drugs. It's going to be everywhere on the street. You have parents thinking, oh my God, my children are going to be able to access drugs easier.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of understanding.
No, there isn't. And partly it's because people don't talk about them, and they just think, oh, well, drugs are illegal, so we don't want anything to change, and that's the view of a lot of people. But it doesn't necessarily solve a lot of problems. So I mean, it's worth just kind of exploring the fact that there's currently what we have is essentially prohibition, and then there is decriminalisation. So that would be like we have in Portugal, and then there's legalisation and regulation, which is what they have in a few states in the US with cannabis, at least. And what Canada is just about to go into. So decriminalisation is where technically the drugs are still illegal, but if you're caught with them on you, you're not prosecuted. So there's no criminal threat if you're caught. I think you might get fined or something, but there's nothing serious. And that allows people, if you're using drugs, that allows you to seek treatment if you need treatment, or it means that you don't have to worry about getting a record which is going to affect your life in future.
So can I just jump in then? So what would be the point? I mean, I'm just going to sit on the fence. What would be the point in decriminalising drugs if it's not legal? Wouldn't the two kind of work hand in hand?
I mean, we tend to think that the best way to deal with it is to go for full-on legalisation, because what that means is you can control what's being sold. So there's a lot more benefits, we think, to full-on legalisation and regulation. There are some really clear benefits to decriminalisation. So for a start, you mentioned already the fact that you don't get a criminal record, and that's not going to be impacting on you in the future. So for drugs, maybe kind of for some drugs like kind of cannabis and MDMA and things, it's perhaps not not such an issue. But for say something like heroin, where there's a lot of health harms if someone's using it, especially if someone's dependent on it, and they want to say seek treatment for it, or go to a needle exchange. A lot of people don't want to do that when it's still actually illegal. When they could still have a record for it, and it stops a lot of people who are in most need from actually seeking treatment. So decriminalisation does help a lot of people. I mean, so the reason why Portugal did it back in 2001 is they were suffering from a huge number of drug deaths and a huge rate of HIV transmission.
Mm-hmm.
So they introduced decriminalisation, and along with that, a kind of raft of measures that kind of help people who were using drugs. And now they've got one of the best rates of HIV transmission in Europe, and their drug deaths have shot down. So it has really helped them.
Yeah, that's good. But I'm still I can't see what would be the point of decriminalising the drug without legalising it, only because you still got the fact that it's not legal. So people that are, dependent on drugs are still going to have to go and seek it from, I don't know, an illegal source, like, I don't know, a drug dealer.
A drug dealer or wherever it's been. Yeah.
So surely the two should kind of work automatically together in a way, because you're not dealing with...
Yeah, exactly. You're not, because there's a kind of public health side, which is where decriminalisation is useful, but then there's a much bigger issue, which is essentially that when it's illegal, the criminal market or this huge market, which is a £1 billion market, is just being funneled into essentially organised crime, because it all goes to the top levels eventually. And that's not dealt with at all. Whereas when you actually fully legalise and regulate, which is what they're just about to do in Canada with cannabis, and the reasons why is simply because they do want to they want to take this money out of the criminal market.
Take full control.
Take full
everything.
Control. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To take back control, to use the leave.
Take back control. That definitely sounds like,
Yeah, exactly.
a kind of, what's the word? Oh God, I can't think tonight. I've left my brain somewhere. But when you're trying to encourage people to kind of come around to your way of thinking, that sounds like
a powerful phrase.
A good slogan. Yeah,
exactly.
Definitely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So when we say decriminalising drugs, we're talking about all drugs, aren't we?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, it depends what you're looking at. So Portugal has decriminalised all drugs.
Okay.
Other countries are taking a kind of more stepwise approach where they're taking the individual drugs.
Do like the cannabis, but I think cannabis
exactly.
has been
It's
quite
cannabis,
popular.
and partly it's the most used ones.
Yeah.
A lot of people use it medicinally.
Is it definitely the most used, or is it the drug that most people are willing to admit they use?
I think it's definitely the most used.
Okay.
Yeah. I think because even a lot of people who are very reluctant to come forward. I mean, there's a lot of kind of anonymous surveys that go around, and I think cannabis is still it's always the most popular illegal drug.
Yeah.
So
I would say, I think,
yeah,
it's quite. And I think, do you think that's because of the way it's? Is it because of how easy it is to get? Is it how it's portrayed in the media? Is it how it's portrayed, by celebrities, music artists? It's definitely, well, I don't want to say it's a sort of a young drug, but definitely amongst younger people, it's just like the norm in college, in uni.
I mean, there's loads of things that make it popular, but I mean, it is a quite complicated. And actually, when you mention age, there's actually more and more older people actually using it. I think it's because it kind of occupies this kind of unique space with drugs. So a lot of other drugs you take to go out and party, and that can be either illegal drugs like cocaine, but that can also be like alcohol.
Yeah.
But then cannabis kind of it sits in this kind of unique space where most people use it basically to relax and to socialise and chat, and kind of the only other option you've got there is maybe booze. And a lot of people don't necessarily want to drink, or maybe they want to do both. But a lot of people, a lot of people just enjoy being able to relax in the same way that they would like to do with a drink, but they don't always want to drink.
And it's
quite. And so with young people as well, there's the other issue that they can't necessarily get booze because you've got to go into a shop. And so actually for a lot of people, weed is much easier to get.
But in saying that, so if we were to decriminalise it and legalise it, say take cannabis for example, is it going to be easy for a young person to access?
I mean, that is the kind of the big question. But I mean, again, if you look at examples like tobacco and you look at alcohol, So in the 1990s, there was this. The Alco Pops just came. They were the kind of scare of the day.
The hooch and the wicked.
Exactly, and whatever it's and these kind of blue drinks that look horrendous.
That look like they're going to kill you.
Exactly. But teenagers love them. And so because of that, the government thought, well, we need to bring in some kind of legislation, and they got much tighter on actually the restrictions on shops. So whereas 20 years ago you could maybe walk into a pub with your school uniform on and buy a pint or whatever you might want to buy. Nowadays, if you're a school kid and you walked into a pub, I mean, if I walk into a pub nowadays, I still get ID'd. So I mean, I'm quite.
That's a good thing. When you get older, you appreciate.
I take it as a compliment. Yeah. So that is, I think that's a case in point where it's really restricted. I mean, and that's one case. Try and buy cigarettes, and it's even harder. And again, places which have already regulated. So Colorado was the first state to do it. It's really hard. I mean, it's practically impossible if you're a teenager to buy cannabis like they can, like an adult can. So yeah, I think regulation works in that sense in terms of.
So I mean, because I know in some places, I think it's Canada. I could be wrong. You can get it out of vending machines. Is it Canada, or maybe it might be Colorado actually? I think I was reading.
Not vending machines as such, but you can at least go into dispensaries and just kind of buy it. Sort of making it sound like it's just like you can buy a packet of Maltesers. Not quite, but I think it's in a chemist or something like that. Exactly. They have these sort of. It's fully legal there. You can walk into a shop, and just as long as you've got your ID, you don't have to, because in California for a long time you had to basically kind of pretend there was a medical reason why you'd need it, and it was which kind of undermined the fact that some people do use it for very legitimate medical reasons.
It really does. There's a lot of contradiction, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's the problem. For all those people actually do have a medical reason that want to use it. When everyone's pretending that they've got some kind of medical issue to try and get some, that then undermines what they're trying to use it for, which is kind of which has been a problem. So yeah.
So I mean, how do you feel about that? The fact that there are research that proves that there are some medicinal properties in it that can help you with various different illnesses, including cancer. How do you feel about that then? Because why would you not want to? Why is something that apparently helps or is apparently good, why would it be illegal? Is it because of the other side of things where people argue that it can trigger psychosis and all these other crazy?
There is part of that. There's this big history that goes along with cannabis, which is why it was made illegal, and then there's this huge kind of fear campaign launched around it to make it seem like it's this terrifying thing, and there's reefer madness back in like the 1930s, and so that there's still a huge hanger for that. A lot of people are very afraid of it, and the problem is that there are actually some very legitimate medical uses, and the research is starting to be built up more, but for a long time all the research was just on the harms of cannabis and not on the actual potential medical benefits of cannabis, partly because it wasn't very well understood for a long time. It's a plant, it's very complicated. There's several different things in it that are medically active. Right. And you can get different strains and all sorts of different things, which do make it a more complicated thing to study. And it sits in this unique space where it's not one single compound like a pill, but it's not just like a herbal remedy, because it's a bit more than that.
Yeah.
Which makes it very hard to. First, it makes it really, really hard to regulate for and to actually kind of control. But also, it means that people are very skeptical, because a lot of people, when they think about medical use of cannabis, they do just think that that's kind of like a joke or kind of like an excuse for people just to get stoned.
Yeah, exactly. But there is proof.
There's very strong proof, especially for some conditions. If you meet someone, say with MS, or you meet someone with chronic pain and they're using it, you actually realise, and a lot of them will say things like, I don't want to get stoned, but it's either that or I'm in a huge amount of pain, and it's then when you realise
the stone side of it is just
exactly.
For some a benefit.
Exactly. I mean, they might. Some of them might enjoy the side effects, but
I think most people do. Come on, most people enjoy the side effects.
I mean, I guess if you're using it medically and you had to every day, that you might reach a limit. But
Could you imagine? I know this is like a crazy scenario, but can you imagine if you were just, you'd been advised to take whatever to relieve pain, and your thing was to have a joint or two every night, and every night you're just stoned because. Yeah. It's like the highest grade, cannabis possible.
Well, there's a lot of people that actually are out there doing that right now.
Wow.
So,
how do you function?
Well, that's that. I mean, that's the challenge. But when it's that, or be in a lot of pain, or take a load of prescription pills, that's kind of that's where they are. So yeah, they're in a tricky place. But.
So in the pills, I mean, it will take away that kind of,
So
the thing that makes you sort of relax, right?
Oh well, if it
in a pill form.
So it can do. I mean, it has to be. Well, cannabis isn't usually medical cannabis isn't usually made into pill form. It's usually
okay.
It's formulated in either. I mean, the one form that's kind of used legally in the UK is a kind of spray thing.
Right. Okay.
But it can be made into oil, which can then be. I mean, the thing that most people do is they vape it. So like you would get like a vape, like any other vape, you can kind of vape it. That means they can kind of control their use pretty effectively because you can take a bit. If you're getting a bit too stoned, you can stop.
Just pull back.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas if they're eating like a brownie and expecting to, they might just eat too much and then, Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's another area altogether. Okay, so I mean, obviously, we're talking about cannabis, and I think it is a big one. So, what do you think is taking the UK so long to catch up, even with just cannabis alone?
It's a good question. Why is the UK so behind? I mean, we're trying to fight that one now. So
it's crazy.
And I mean, that's the thing. There have been sort of little baby steps forward. So I mean, 10 years ago, cannabis got moved down from Schedule B to Schedule C, and then the government got scared because the Daily Mail got angry, and then put it back up again. Yeah, and then the head scientist that was in charge of the kind of the advisory council on misuse of drugs at the time, Dave Nutt, he complained about that and a few other things, and then he got the sack. So that really has put the fear into a lot of people that would otherwise come forward. So I think it's just a lot of things happening at the wrong time, and a lot of unfortunate messages just happening, and a lot of pig-headedness essentially from a lot of politicians that don't want to be seen to be being. If you say these arguments and you're a politician, a lot of people say, "Oh, you're soft on drugs." Well, it's not the case, because actually what you're trying to do is just find a better way of dealing with the situation.
Yeah, controlling it.
Yeah, exactly.
That word, control. Yeah. It's interesting you should mention MPs, because there's been quite a bit of MP support, including like Nick Clegg.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's a big fan.
Especially on the legalisation of cannabis. And I think most people, when you hear, an MP supports it, the first thing you've got to think is because they smoke it. But I don't think it's anything to do with that. Whether you do or you don't, the argument is what it is.
Yeah, it's understanding the issues.
I think, obviously, if you do indulge in it, it's more beneficial for yourself.
Yeah, you might understand that perhaps the arguments from a more first-person point of view, but it shouldn't prevent you from doing it.
Yeah, and ultimately you can see the overall picture and why it would be beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, if every MP had to go to prison to figure out how to run a prison, well, I don't know. I don't know if that would be a good thing or not. I won't go into that. But
let's leave it there. But I mean, like Nick Clegg, for example, and these MPs that we were talking about, they've basically said that it's like a 1 billion kind of. You could generate like £1 billion in terms of revenue in the UK alone if they had the control over it.
Yeah, and potentially more as well. I mean, that's
a
kind of
crazy figure.
Yeah, it's huge, and that's just from the tax, and then there's all the kind of the other benefits that you get from, say, police not having to actually police it, having to actually lock fewer people up for it, and hopefully some kind of public health benefit, because you could actually control it. I mean, again, using kind of cannabis as this one example, loads of the cannabis that's on the street is basically like really high potency, essentially skunk. That's really the only thing that most people can get, and a lot of people want more choice. So,
good point. Actually, you mentioned skunk. Now, I think when people talk about psychosis and this kind of weird trips and whatever, usually you can attribute that to skunk use. So, if we're talking about cannabis, would it be cannabis including skunk, or would it be cannabis in its purest form, or how would it kind of go? I mean, I'm presuming you know the answer.
Yeah, I mean, that is a tricky one. What do you do with skunk? But
obviously it's stronger, isn't it?
It is stronger. Well, and the thing to kind of think with, so say with alcohol, all you're worried about is the percentage of it, whereas with cannabis, essentially there's two main things in it. There's the THC, which is the thing that gets you stoned.
And which apparently triggers psychosis.
Apparently, although the link has been made a lot by the tabloids, it turns out that there's a small number of people that are at risk. For a lot of people, they're not really that much at risk. But there are certainly a small number of people for whom they are at risk. And there's certain other triggers factors as well, like if you're younger. So if you do have a developing brain, you are definitely more at risk than if you reach maturity, whatever that might be at 20, 21 or 25 or 80. Basically, your brain is a bit more
Fragile.
Yeah, it's a bit more fragile under that age, which makes it a challenge because lots of teenagers use it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, so along with the THC, there's also the other compound in cannabis is CBD, which isn't psychoactive, so it doesn't make you stoned or affect your mood in any dramatic way. Some people say it maybe makes them a bit more relaxed. But what it does seem to do, and there's quite clear evidence, is it tends to mediate the kind of the most unnerving effects, so either the anxiety or the kind of the kind of psychotic-like effects. And in fact, it's being looked at even on its own as a compound that could be used to kind of address maybe psychosis from other things. Yeah,
that's sort of looking at it. Again, it's very contradictory because if you're saying on one hand it can cause psychosis, but then on the other hand, there's other kind of
and the main kind of expert that talks about it, she talks. This is Val Curran. She talks about it as being a kind of yin and yang type situation. And the problem with skunk is it's all of the yin and none of the yang, or whichever way around it goes. It's all of it's
the bad stuff.
It's all the bad stuff. And so it doesn't necessarily provide that neuroprotection that some people want, or that kind of helps. But when you talk about how you'd regulate it, the problem is some people actually do want to get really stoned.
Yeah.
Instead, and some people are very enthusiastic about it. So I'd say that the way forward isn't necessarily to ban skunk outright, but simply to make it a bit like a top shelf kind of product.
Yeah, because it'll make it safer.
Yeah, exactly. And for everyone else that just currently, essentially what we only really have basically like the equivalent of whiskey at the moment, and kind of slightly dodgy whiskey at that.
Not so dodgy whiskey.
Whereas what would be better is if you had the full range, so you could actually, have the equivalent of a beer, which would be much mellower, much more relaxing, and much less kind of trying for your brain, especially if it's a bit fragile.
Interesting. Definitely food for thought, Henry. We do have to jump into a really short break.
It's all right.
I've got loads more questions for you, love. But definitely, if you are listening and if you are, moved by the conversation, if there's something you want to add, do feel free. This is Westside on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Snapchat. Or you can give us a call in the studio if you're feeling brave. 0208 574 4113. I'm here with Henry Fisher from Volteface. We'll be right back real soon. So before the short break, really happy you're here, by the way. Thank you. I think it's great.
I'm having fun.
It's just, I'm so glad. It's just great insight to be able to talk about something that I feel a lot of people are probably really passionate about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I can talk about it for far too long anyway, so it's good. Good to have an excuse, really.
We've only got about another hour, so you think you can carry into that?
I'll do my best, yeah.
You'll try.
Yeah.
I want to shout out to your colleagues, actually, locked in and listening and
exactly.
enjoying the vibe.
They're playing it right now.
Yes, so definitely good to have their ears. I mean, it is a topic that I know a lot of people, especially we have a lot of young listeners, so I know that people will be, listening in and sort of, enjoying the discussion. We've been speaking mainly about cannabis and the fact that we are just behind here in the UK.
Yeah.
Just for people that maybe didn't catch what we were talking about before the break, why do you think there's a reluctance to move forward with decriminalisation and legalisation of cannabis specifically?
I mean, with cannabis specifically, I think there's this fear, and especially the kind of the media fear around. Well, we were just talking about skunk before as well. This fear that it is dangerous. That it's going to turn everyone psychotic or whatever. And I think there's that big fear, and that fear from politicians, and it stops them actually doing something a bit more pragmatic about it. I mean, that's the thing in some other countries, so Canada in particular, they really have grasped the nettle, and they're trying to do something new about it. They're like, well, we just can't go on much longer with this. And there's a really high rates of cannabis use in Canada, so it's something that clearly is far more relevant or that's far more present in society. So they wanted to move on it, but once they've actually done it, they will. To some extent, they're experimenting, but they will prove. Or hopefully they will prove that actually regulation is the way forward and a far better way of dealing with it. And there's other examples which have sort of gone some of the way already. So Holland is the other one where, of course, you can go across right now. You can go to a coffee shop in Amsterdam and you can get stoned right now if you wanted to. Yeah,
and that's the thing, isn't it? Because I know we were talking off air about the fact that a lot of people feel they need to go to Dam or Amsterdam just to kind of relax and enjoy that side of things.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems to work there. There doesn't seem to be high levels of crime in that area.
Yeah, if anything, it's the tourists that go across and they're not used to the fact that it's just normal.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that always cause the problems.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's causing problems over there where now a lot of politicians are saying, well, actually, you know, why don't we introduce rules that mean that tourists can't access it? It's only here for actual, people from Holland. But I mean that causes its own problems because they're also got a lot of tourism from it.
Yeah, that's one of the main draws these days.
Yeah, exactly. So it becomes a complicated situation, and it's interesting seeing what the Netherlands do. But then even now they're actually taking baby steps forward to make it more official. So currently they have this weird situation where it's legal, or it's kind of accepted that you can buy it in coffee shops, and that's allowed. Technically, that's not legal, but they just allow it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but coffee shops, actually, the way they source their cannabis, that is technically still illegal. So they still have to source all their weed off the black market, which creates this weird situation. I mean, it's often from home grows and things like that, rather than kind of criminal syndicates. But it does create this weird situation, and now they're actually starting to change that, because along with that there was some violence that was causing problems, and so they're now actually trying to fully regulate the whole system.
I think so, yeah. Especially if it's such it's big business, isn't it? It's massive. Okay, so we kind of touched on the fact that some MPs are really warming to the idea of legalising cannabis. And Nick Clegg was one of them. And he said, one of the quotes that he said, I pulled from one of an article, said that British politicians need to open their eyes to what is happening in the rest of the world. And then he went on to say, cannabis prohibition is being swept away on a tide of popular opinion, replaced with responsible legal regulation. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, well, in fact, I think when Nick made that statement, it was in response to the very first policy paper that we brought out, which actually looked at what was happening in Canada and looked at what's happening in some US. I mean, California is the big one that's gone as well, and that's huge. Now, a quarter of the US population can now access legal cannabis in some form, which is huge. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So do you think eventually it's going to be like nationwide?
I think gradually it's creeping forward. It's interesting. There's lots, there's a kind of fear that lots of kind of liberal policies are kind of under threat right now, but drugs seems to be the one that, despite having had no movement for a long time, is creeping forward. And so in Germany's just had medical cannabis. Berlin's got a pilot for kind of recreational access.
Okay.
It's quite limited, but they're doing that. Italy's moving forwards on cannabis in various ways. So a lot of there's just a lot of countries moving forwards, and Ireland as well is another big one that's just starting to move forwards on medical cannabis, and it will pretty soon. If we don't do something, the UK will look like the odd one out, and there will be people, just as how there are people going across to Amsterdam. There'll be people that could just go across to Dublin, or can go across anywhere else. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We really need to get with the programme.
Yeah.
We say that, but not in a way where it's done irresponsibly. It would need to be done, I suppose, in a similar. Well, I want to use Amsterdam as an example, but then you've just told me that actually the way they source their cannabis is not necessarily legal. But I mean, that kind of thing, that kind of setup, maybe if you had like coffee shops and stuff here in the UK as well.
And every place that does it, they're kind of a bit of an experiment. So Amsterdam was the first, and they did it years and years ago. So they got a lot of things not quite right, and then they've had to change a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. It's trial and error.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so each state in the US, they each one has done it a slightly different way, and they've learned from the last one, and they're changing. Canada's going to be the next big one. That's a huge country, and when that goes, and they are taking their time doing it. It was the election pledge of their prime minister, and he got elected back in 2015. It's now 2 years later, and they're still only just kind of coming together with their plan. So it'll be done, but they're taking it very slowly. I think the phrase that a lot of people use when they're advising taking drugs is start low. What was it? Oh, I can't even remember now. But basically, go slow.
Take it.
Start low, go slow. That's it. Yeah.
Okay, start low, go slow.
Yeah.
Interestingly, there's a lot of celebrity support. With especially cannabis. I mean, we're still sort of sticking on cannabis just a little bit for now. We'll move on to other stuff in a minute. Even just kind of like looking at some of the, celebrities that are really kind of in our faces, if you like. Someone like Rihanna. There's been rumours that she wants to launch her own line of marijuana called Mariana. I mean, it's just like, it's a bit corny, but to even feel free, because I mean, she's openly out there. We all know that she indulges in a spliff here and there. Cause,
it's in music videos and everything.
She's open with that. So it's definitely in, pop culture, everyday culture is there. So really, for us to ignore it, what's the point?
And the more places that make it legal, the more people feel actually they can be proud and kind of saying, this is something I enjoy and it's something that I want to, not feel like I'm being a criminal for. And I want to be able to, I don't want to have to source, something furtively off the black market. Yeah. And I want, good quality weed.
Exactly. That's the bottom line, isn't it? And I think with the good quality, then kind of whittles out all the nonsense and the trashy stuff, which could cause medical problems.
Yeah, exactly. And also they want to be able to get it in safety. So not, at the moment people either have to go and call their dealer, which not everyone enjoys.
And then you're putting yourself at risk, because if it's at night, you don't know, you could get jumped, you could get, there's all sorts of things.
And of course, then they buy it, and then they're in possession of cannabis, which is illegal.
Yeah.
And, that can impact. There's still a lot of stop and searches which happens, which is clearly an issue.
And you hear all these horror stories. I mean, I don't know, how many of them are true, but, people crossing, like, weed with different chemicals, so you get a different kind of buzz and all of this kind of stuff, So if it is controlled, then there'll be less of that, and it's...
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
I mean, often these stories can be rumours, but I mean, there was certainly one of the rumours that was a bit more scary last year. I don't know if actually there were any if in the end there were any examples that were picked up by authorities and tested to actually find out whether the rumours were substantiated. But so obviously, kind of recently, there's been all these legal highs like spice and things. And there were kind of rumours last year that there were some dealers that were actually getting the kind of chemical that's on spice, or the chemicals that are on spice, which make them psychoactive. So they're called SCRAs, and then spraying them onto cannabis to make it seem stronger. And people were people were getting experiences that they really weren't expecting, that were far stronger and far more unnerving.
That's quite scary to think
about. Exactly. And in a legal market, that wouldn't happen. And even what looks like good weed, you don't know if it's been grown, what conditions it's been grown. You don't know if it's got mold on it. Loads of little kind of maybe boring things, but they're kind of like consumer quality things.
Yeah, well, it is, and it is something that if it is regulated, all these things will be dealt with, and Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's the difference between being able to buy your booze in a shop or ending up having to essentially drink like moonshine that's been made in the bathtub. It's
exactly. It's true.
Yeah.
It's so true. You want decent stuff. So 10 reasons why drugs in general should be decriminalised. I found this article, it was talking about 10 different reasons. It was quite an old article, but I found it quite interesting. And just a few of them I want to throw at you and see what you think. One of them is, I think we've kind of touched on this, addressing the real issues behind, why people use drugs. A lot of people use it because they could be depressed. There could be social and economic factors behind why people.
Yeah, a lot of people use drugs. They either use them to enjoy themselves or to relax, but essentially they use them to escape in some way.
Yeah.
To come home at the end of the day or whatever it might be.
Just close the door.
Exactly, and just relax. Use them for some form of enjoyment and escape. Or if they've got more serious problems in their life, they use them to actually kind of not think about them.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Reducing crime, we kind of touched on. Eliminate the criminal marketplace, we kind of touched on. Drug users are a majority. So apparently recent research shows that nearly half of all 15 to 16-year-olds have used an illegal drug. Up to 1.5 million people use ecstasy every weekend. And amongst young people, illegal drug use is seen as normal, which kind of adds to the whole fight against drugs. It's kind of pointless because...
Exactly. And when you tell someone that, drugs are going to kill them, and if they just take one toke on a spliff, they're going to be addicted to life, and they're going to be on a slippery slope.
It's not real, is it?
In 5 years' time, they're going to be, in a gutter with a needle in their arm, and then they actually find out that that's not true at all. If you've told them other useful advice alongside that, like, I don't know, maybe don't smoke cigarettes because they're bad for you, and what information do they keep and what information do they throw out when they find out that some of it's not true?
Yeah.
So there's, you kind of want to actually be able to get them to think about their health in a sensible way, so that they know that maybe there are some risks, and they know how to deal with them, rather than thinking, oh, they're really, drugs are bad and they're going to kill me. Oh no, wait, no, my friend took them last week and they're fine.
They're fine, yeah, exactly. And that kind of leads on to the next point about truthful information in education. If you're fully versed in what's what, side effects, what can happen, overindulgence, and all of that stuff, then it's easier to make an informed decision.
Exactly, and it's not all rosy. I mean, we've touched on kind of the health effects, but there's kind of, so with weed especially, if you get stoned all the time, that can affect your relationships.
Yeah.
Either with, like you say, parents or with your friends.
Yeah.
If you're getting stoned every day all summer,
very productive.
you're not going to be doing a lot. You could be outside doing something else.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or maybe your girlfriend or boyfriend might appreciate a text and you don't text them back because you're too high.
True. Making all drug users safe. I think that's crucial, especially when you talk outside of cannabis, like the other drugs more.
Yeah, exactly.
Like heroin and crack cocaine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're kind of very much at kind of one end of the kind of quite extreme dangers, but then there's kind of lots of ones in the middle of so MDMA and ecstasy, which is
party drugs.
Party drugs, exactly, which are used by a lot of people, and that do have some significant potential dangers.
Yeah.
We've
seen all the kind of, sadly, when someone dies as a result of a bad pill.
Yeah.
It's.
Yeah. So 58 people last year died from ecstasy in the UK.
Oh.
I mean, again, that has to be balanced against the number of people that took ecstasy and didn't die, which is hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, is that because of ecstasy as it is ecstasy, or was it a bad pill?
There's kind of not quite a myth of bad pills, but they tend to get the idea that there's this bad pill every time. There can be bad pills. That's certainly the case. So, in particular, one compound that's sometimes put in pills is PMMA, and it feels a lot like MDMA, but it takes a lot longer to come on, and it feels like it's not as strong. But unfortunately, it's much more toxic. So it has this effect where then someone who's maybe used to taking MDMA, ecstasy, they then take another, and in fact, what they've ended up doing is taking a toxic dose when they thought that it wasn't enough, and that can happen.
Usually, what?
That has been in the past. What's happened, but I mean, more and more now, what's actually the issue is that partly as a kind of marketing thing, the producers of pills are making them stronger and stronger and stronger, and that's really the danger, especially when you're quite young and you're quite small. So if you're a 14-year-old girl, you are going to be far more susceptible to taking too much than, say, someone that is a 20-stone year-old guy that whatever that's kind of
lived a bit.
Exactly, that's lived a bit. Yeah.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
It's sad but true.
Yeah, and it's often the people that are youngest and they don't know quite what they should be taking, how much. So they're the people that run into trouble because they accidentally take too much because they don't know what they're doing. But I mean, there's things that can be done. So the big thing that happened last year in the UK, and it's kind of probably the biggest step forward that the UK has taken in drug policy in the last few years, was at 2 festivals. It's an organisation called The Loop, which I kind of have also volunteered for. Okay. They set up these stalls where then people who then went to these festivals could take their drugs to the tent, give a sample in. They were then tested by a group of scientists in the back, and then they could come back like half an hour later and find out what was in their drugs. So they don't get their drugs given back to them, but they could find out what was in them. That was legal and allowed by the police. And then and alongside getting their results, they were also told what the risks were, perhaps how to mitigate them.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and so you might get the odd kind of group of friends that would leave the tent and be like, yeah, we've got the good drugs. But then there'd also be other people that would leave kind of maybe a lot more subdued and a lot more so because they think, okay, I shouldn't really be taking as much as I thought I should be taking. Or even just thinking those drugs weren't what I thought they were. I mean, we had some drugs that were given into us that were pills and they were concrete. Yeah.
Concrete.
Concrete. Yeah. Oh, they were really hard as well. They really.
How does the body even break down concrete like that? It's mad.
I know, right? Yeah, they're not going to have a good time in the Portaloo.
Well, no, they're not. And they'll probably end up in casualties somewhere.
That's the problem, right? People can end up in trouble because they don't know what they're taking.
Yeah.
So that was a kind of pilot that was initiated last year, and it'd be interesting to see what happens this year in terms of where else they might go.
So it's just at what festival was that?
So it's at Secret Garden Party and at Kendal Calling. So they were kind of 2 smallish mid-sized festivals.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's only good for the people that go to festivals, right? And there's a lot of other people that use drugs in a lot of other settings, like just on a normal night out.
Yeah, every day.
Or a house party or whatever it might be, wherever they happen to use their drugs. And for them, there isn't that option in the UK yet. So,
Again, another reason why perhaps decriminalising and legalising would work.
Yeah, exactly. If people knew what they could buy, they'd go out and buy what they want. People don't buy drugs to put themselves at risk. People buy drugs to have a good time.
To enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. No one wants to take a pill that's too strong and have a horrible time and end up throwing up or even worse in hospital.
Yeah.
People want to take the pill that they know is going to give them a good night.
True. It's so true. So some stats on drug misuse. This was taken from the Health and Social Care Information Centre paper on drug misuse, published for 2016. And just a couple of facts. Drug misuse-related hospital admissions here in England in 2014-15, because obviously a year back, isn't it? There were like 8,149 hospital admissions with a primary diagnosis of drug-related mental health and behavioural disorders, which was 14% more than 2013-2014, but only 4% higher than 2004-2005. And then there were just over 14,000 hospital admissions with a primary diagnosis of poisoning by illicit drugs, which is 2% more than 2013-14, but 57% more than 2004-2005. And finally, there was an increase in drug-related deaths in England. In 2014, there were just over 2,248, which is 15%. There was a 15% increase on 2013 and a 44% increase on 2004. So, for me, I kind of understood that there's more drug misuse. So there's a lot more people trying drugs and indulging in drugs. So drug misuse, and there's more poisoning. So there's a lot of dubious happenings, like people doing whatever they're doing with drugs, and more drug-related deaths, which means there's not the help, there's no education, there's no all the things that I guess decriminalising and legalising would put in place.
So what's interesting is when you actually look at the amount of people that are using drugs, it is actually gradually, year on year, starting to fall on the whole.
On the whole, yeah.
It's just people using drugs. It might differ for individual drugs. So cannabis is definitely decreasing with some of the drugs that kind of goes up and down, but they either stay level or they tend to come. So when you're then looking at actually the heart, because that's hospital admission stuff, so that's harms. So they're increasing. So clearly we're getting something wrong. If fewer people are using drugs and more people are ending up in hospital because of them, then we've got something wrong.
Yeah.
They should be both going down, or even if usage is going up, just the harm should be going down. So clearly we've got something wrong with our policy.
It'd be interesting to see how our figures compare with perhaps a country that has now introduced a decriminalisation or has at least started decriminalising some drugs.
Exactly, and it's going to be interesting seeing where they come from. I mean, it's early days with a lot of those places.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of only been from cannabis, which doesn't tend to affect things like drug-related deaths and stuff. But again, the example I gave with Portugal was where heroin-related deaths had gone down dramatically. So that's kind of one case where decrim had clearly helped. Yeah.
We are talking about decriminalising and legalising all drugs. We've been focusing mainly on cannabis because it's probably one of the most popular. It is one of the most popular in the UK. Yeah. And we've been asking why we haven't gone down that route yet here in the UK.
Yeah.
I think we're going to be the last. What do you reckon?
I mean, I hope not. Not if I've got anything to do with it. That's the plan.
This is your mission, right?
Exactly. Try and make some change happen. Yeah.
So for people that didn't catch us at the beginning, just again, if you could just recap what Volteface are all about and what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So we're a think tank, and we try and influence government policy to do with anything to do with drugs. So not just drugs themselves, but other things like nightlife and prisons and other issues, maybe treatment for addictions, things like that. But a lot of what we do is essentially just trying to make people aware of the arguments of why legalizing and regulating drugs would make a lot of sense, because a lot of people are pretty unconvinced.
Yeah.
Which is understandable. A lot of people have a lot of legitimate fears because they've been told a lot of horrendous things about drugs for years, and they're not safe. But we think the best way to actually deal with the harms is to regulate them.
Absolutely. I think, a lot of people do have fears, but I think a lot more people are definitely coming around to that way of thinking. And
Yeah.
and again, as we sort of said in between, whilst the music was playing, wouldn't you rather know that it's being regulated, even if you're not someone that advocates drug taking, you might be dead against it, but wouldn't you rather know that if someone in your family or someone that you knew did want to indulge, that at least it's going to be regulated in a way that is going to keep them as safe as possible, rather than just, I don't know.
Exactly. I mean, I don't skydive, but at least I'm safe in the knowledge that if any of my friends skydive, they're going to do it in a proper skydiving centre. I hope so.
Well, we hope so,
they're not just going to find some dodgy guy to take them up in a plane and throw them out, because that doesn't sound so safe. But that's the kind of situation where we are with drugs, which is kind of crazy.
It's true. But like you said, it's just what people have been fed for so long.
Yeah.
And and I think you'll probably find that it's the older generations that are more, resistant. They're not really, because, you ask any young person whether they take cannabis or not, I reckon 90% of them would probably, I don't know, this is just me. You probably got more stats that...
that's the thing. It's interesting. With young people, a lot more and more young people actually aren't using drugs, and it's interesting seeing where that comes from, and it seems to be far more effective than any kind of fear campaign or anything else. Social media seems to be the thing, and it's not just illegal drugs, it's also alcohol and cigarettes. Because they don't want to be caught on Instagram or Snapchat,
exactly.
Wasted, thrown up in the corner at a party where all their friends, because teenagers are horrible, will all take pictures of them and all post them. And that seems to be what's influenced. They want to be shown to be looking healthy, and it's pretty hard to actually get a job nowadays if you're young.
Well, social media is the first thing that they look for.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're there, looking like you're partying all the time, it can restrict you kind of what you're trying to do, and so that is actually influencing people's behaviours. And I don't think it's not necessarily a bad thing if people are using drugs less. I guess what it needs to be kind of mediated against is people are still going to be using drugs, and it's looking out for those people as well.
And I suppose even though it might not be, I don't know if it would mean that a lot more young people aren't doing it completely. It's probably more low key.
Time to time, just at the weekends, things like that.
More sensibly, maybe.
Yeah, more sensibly, more responsible use, maybe you'd hope. I mean, it depends what they're being told, because as often as someone thinks gets told a sensible message about drugs, there's another rumour that gets started on the mill about something else that then teenagers can believe. So it's important that the kind of right message gets across to people about actually how to use drugs responsibly. If you see any alcohol advert, it says drink responsibly.
Yes.
You don't. When you get a baggie from a dealer, it doesn't say take this responsibly.
It's true.
It's
true. I know you mentioned David Knight beforehand, actually, just while we're talking about alcohol. This is interesting because he said more people die withdrawing from alcohol than any other drug. Obviously, alcohol is a drug, which I think a lot of people don't accept either.
And so drug deaths as well. I think the figure is somewhere around the 2,000 mark for drugs. That's all other drugs, all illegal drugs. For alcohol, it's 7,000. So that's
crazy.
It's crazy. And it is a dangerous drug. If the kind of thing that's often said is, if it was invented today, it would be a Class A drug without a doubt.
Alcohol.
Alcohol. Yeah.
I can see how.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, but then which then makes you think, well, a lot of people actually can enjoy alcohol responsibly and have a good time.
Without getting completely.
Exactly. And it's just about generating a sensible culture. If people, a lot of people realise if they get up at the start of the day and have beer, and they do that every day, they might start to realise they've got a problem pretty quickly. Whereas that doesn't necessarily exist for a lot of drugs. And again, I need to keep using cannabis as this other example, but a lot of people actually do wake up and smoke weed at the start of the day, and that's sort of a normal thing for a lot of people to do. And it's
get themselves into the day.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not necessarily the best way to start the day. You might want to save that for later in the day when you want to relax at the end of the day. But that's a culture that hasn't really been created yet. So yeah.
Okay, just moving away from sort of cannabis just a little bit. The whole idea of decriminalising and legalising all drugs.
Yeah.
Just really briefly, because time is just not on our side at the moment. How would that affect sort of people that use? I mean, I know there's middle kind of drugs in the middle, but just going to the extreme, like heroin and crack cocaine.
And that's the real challenge, right? How do you actually legalise those kind of drugs or regulate for them? And
because is there? Sorry to interrupt you, Henry, but is there ever a situation where it's okay to use those kind of drugs.
We're never going to be seen in a situation where you can just pop into the corner shop and buy heroin.
Yeah.
That's not going to be a situation that we ever arrive at. But then you have to look at why what it is that's on the street is on the street. So it's heroin that people inject, and it's crack, which is crack cocaine, right? So that's another form of cocaine.
Yes.
But so heroin, it's the same thing as diamorphine, which is actually what's given to you in hospital. That's if a lot of people at some point in their life will be given heroin, but they'll be given it by a doctor and they won't realise that they're given heroin. They'll probably enjoy it.
Pain relief, right?
Yeah, it's pain relief. So people have this kind of double think around drugs, where they don't really kind of.
But this is it. So again, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but maybe this again. I mean, I don't have any desire to kind of use any hardcore drugs myself, but I guess if it was decriminalised and if it was legalised, again, to know that if someone has dabbled in that kind of drug, to know that there is a place. I mean, we're just kind of repeating a lot of what we said around cannabis. To know that there's a place that you can kind of go and
exactly
do it safely and getting fresh needles.
Yeah, exactly, and that's something. Also, we have needle exchanges in this country, but we don't have yet, which exists in a few other countries. What's called like supervised injection facilities or drug consumption rooms.
That's crucial.
Yeah, and so the Netherlands has something like 30 something of them. It's got loads, and it's had them for years. Copenhagen has just opened up a massive new one, and it has rooms where people can inject but it also has rooms where people can smoke crack. So yeah,
sounds crazy, doesn't it?
I think I can't remember who told me this, but I think so. Something that's interesting is because they have a kind of public health thing on smoking cigarettes, so you're not allowed to smoke indoors because secondhand smoke.
Yeah.
The one drug you can't smoke inside is cigarettes, even though you can
do everything else.
Yeah, even though you can smoke crack.
But then I suppose it's because
I mean, just that's an interesting kind of caveat, but I mean that's a much more pragmatic and sensible way of looking at it, and it does save lives. So the first place that had one of these injection rooms was Switzerland, and again it had a huge problem with heroin back in the 80s or 90s, and now it just doesn't have this problem at all, and it's because part of the problem with heroin is it's very expensive and it's very addictive. And so if you get addicted to heroin, you then need to find a lot of money very quickly
to keep it up.
Yeah, and the best way to get a lot of money if you're addicted to heroin, especially if you're struggling to hold down whatever other job you might have, is to sell more heroin very quickly. And the best people to sell heroin to are your friends, because they're like, okay, well, you're taking heroin and you haven't died, so it can't be that bad.
Yeah.
And so it creates this kind of huge pyramid scheme where everyone, then they sell to their friends and they sell to their friends. So then once you actually have a system where you have a supervised injection facility, and so in Switzerland they have prescription heroin, so doctors can give people heroin if they need it, then they don't need to sell to their friends. And so in Switzerland they have this system, and they don't have this huge epidemic that they used to have. And it's simply because they provide prescription heroin, and because they have a supervised injection facility, which means that they exist all over the world, or several countries around the world, and no one has ever died of an overdose in a supervised injection facility.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, that is a stat worth talking about, because again, even if you're not someone that cares for that lifestyle or wants any kind of anything to do with it, that is interesting to know.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite important to know.
It's huge, and that most people don't really know that. But when we have 2,000 or so overdoses happening in this country every year, it's important to know that actually this alternative exists. And I think Glasgow is just en route to actually get the first ever drug supervised injection facility in this country.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of in the pipeline.
Yeah. See how
so that's exciting. Though. Yeah, and then just across the pond, well, not the big pond, the small one. Dublin is just about to get one as well. So it's getting closer. It's getting closer.
Hopefully, we're not lost.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've spoken quite a bit about sort of for. Against. Now, obviously, there are a lot of people that are against there. I think it's sort of changed. It's definitely changed because, again, like I was saying to you, when I was trying to do a little bit of research on people against, it seems like back in the 90s, there were loads and loads of people, loads of kind of articles and all of this stuff about why you shouldn't and why we shouldn't. But now, not so much. It's becoming increasingly harder to find people that openly sort of stand against it. Well, maybe it's just where I'm looking, but I know the producer on the show was trying to get MP Sarah Newton, Minister for Vulnerability, Safeguarding and Countering Extremism, to join us this evening to share her opinions, because she's been, quite vocal or quite open about her stance on this issue.
Yeah.
So, what would you say if Sarah was in the studio with us now, and you could turn to her and say anything? What would you say?
I mean, I'd say that basically she's willfully ignoring the evidence. So the argument she presents is the very, very good first half of the evidence. So what she says is, I can't remember what exact words are now, but it's basically, drugs are dangerous. Okay, we've established that they can be dangerous. That's fine. I think we both agree on that. But then her conclusion is, so let's make them illegal, and then that makes the problem go away. That's essentially her position. Yeah. But of course, you just look around and you realise that's not the case. So I would say that they're dangerous, or they can be dangerous. The best way to control those dangers and mitigate those harms is to regulate it, to put the government in control, because currently they're not in control. Currently it's criminals that are in control of what you can buy.
Yeah.
And they're reaping the profits from it, which are pretty large.
She said, "This government has no plans to decriminalise drug misuse. Our approach on drugs remains clear. We must prevent drug use in our communities, support people through treatment and recovery, and tackle the supply of illegal drugs. The decriminalisation of drugs would not address the harms associated with drug dependence and the misery that this can cause to families and communities. We are currently developing a new drug strategy, working across government and with key partners to identify what further steps we can take to tackle this issue." So to me, that kind of says on one hand, yeah, obviously, there's no intention of kind of decriminalising it, but then she kind of touches on an important point where she says, supporting people through treatment and recovery and tackling the supply of illegal drugs. Now, surely the decriminalisation and legalisation of drugs would do exactly that.
It would tackle those things.
Yeah, it would do exactly that. It would do all the things that you want done.
Yeah, exactly. That's the argument that we want to put to her, and it's frustrating to know that actually other countries have looked at it and reached that conclusion already, and it seems to some extent that the government here is putting its head in the sand. It doesn't want to hear that there's this other answer, because it doesn't want to be accused by places like the Daily Mail of being soft on drugs, or of that kind of thing.
That's crazy to think that. Well, more things that were put in the email that just kind of, as I said, she couldn't make it here in person or on the phone, but there were some key points that were laid out in the email, and a few other things that were mentioned was the evidence from the government's independent experts, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, is that the use of cannabis is a significant public health issue and can unquestionably cause harm to individuals and society. Another point is there is a substantial body of scientific and medical evidence to show that controlled drugs are harmful and can damage people's mental and physical health and our wider community. But I don't think people that are for decriminalisation and legalisation are actually arguing that.
No, I mean, we're not saying that people will be giving it out on the streets. In fact, what we're saying is that it will be less available for the people that are going to be perhaps more at risk, so to younger people. For people that do want to use it, they will be able to access safer product in a safer way. And what it also allows, so if you talk to your dealer, they don't provide any kind of useful advice about you should maybe take less. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's really all their kind of that's their main focus.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was being done in a kind of regulated facility, you could actually deliver some kind of useful advice
along with it.
Yeah.
I suppose it's in the same way you'd buy a box of cigarettes.
Yeah.
You now know
it has a massive health warning on it. Right?
Yeah, and it's hidden behind the thing, so we're making it a whole.
Exactly.
We're not encouraging you to do this, but you smoke cigarettes, so fine.
Yeah, so tobacco is a massive success story of regulation.
Yeah.
The use is declining massively, and year on year on year it's going down, and it's because of these strict public health regulation measures that they're putting in. Yeah.
Final point: drug misuse has not gone up in the last year. Beg your pardon. The trend in last year drug use has been relatively flat since the 2009-10 CSEW, although there are small fluctuations between years.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, so drug use has stayed more or less constant, and yet more people are dying from drugs. And then there's other issues which other related health issues that aren't being dealt with effectively. So people that are presenting for treatment for cannabis addiction, which is related to a lot of mental health problems, that's increasing year on year. There's more and more people turning up and saying, I've actually got a problem with my cannabis use, possibly because they're using very strong cannabis use, very strong strains. And the support isn't there for those people if it was in a regulated market and you were going into, the person that runs your dispensary, or whatever it might be, and buying however much every week, and they thought you're buying a bit too much, mate. You could even put regulations in place so that they could actually limit their use, or they'd be obliged to actually speak to you and say you're perhaps using a bit too much. You might want to just mediate your use. It's
true, there's so many different things you can do with it.
Yeah, exactly. And we can learn the lessons of the alcohol industry and the tobacco industry, which previously were not regulated anywhere near enough. But we can learn those lessons, and when we construct a regulated market for cannabis or for MDMA or for any of these other drugs, we can learn these lessons and create a tailor-made system of regulation for these drugs to actually mitigate their harms and create a safer system for everyone that wants to use them. And they'll enjoy it a lot more.
That kind of ends perfectly on what has been a very interesting hour and a half, I have to say.
Yeah, it's been good fun.
Okay, so to play you out, I've got a very it's not even ironic, it's more apt. It's Tipsy, Jay Kwan. Are you going to go get tipsy now?
No, I'm going to get the bus home.
But after, once you get home.
Maybe.
Henry, thank you so much.
Cheers.
So this is just for Henry.
Yeah.
Every time I hit this, Henry, I'm going to think of you now. You do realise?
Yeah.